a little different here in a second. Let's see here. We are waiting on Rylan, who I think is about to burst in the door at any minute. There he is. He's bursting in. Oh,
hey,
man. Hey, buddy.
Sorry.
No problem.
Yeah, Sheree took Abby Grace to the youth stuff, and I was just waiting for her to get back, and then I didn't look at my watch because I just assumed she'd get back before this started.
You would think maybe. Well, my girls, she took my girls too, and there was we had a little drama at our house. Nothing unusual. But, so that's fine. That's
yeah, well, it's my fault. I wasn't paying attention.
That's okay.
But I have 2 young children at home right now, waiting for their moms.
Well, mine are upstairs. My young children are upstairs watching a show, and so we'll see how that goes. Hopefully, they will. Hopefully, that will go well. They could burst down at any moment, so
they won't do that.
They might. They might. They've done pretty good though. I mean, my littles have been here most of the time. Okay. Some weeks they haven't, but
I've noticed.
You never know when there's going to be bursting. Bursting of some sort could happen,
That is true. You never know.
So, for those of you that are joining for the first time, or maybe the first time in a while, we've been on kind of like a little mini series.
Yeah.
And we've called it The Other Books. And what we're doing is we're talking about the books in the Apocrypha, or what are sometimes called the deuterocanonical books.
Why are they called those things?
Well, like second canon. Like Deuteronomy is second law.
Okay.
Yeah,
why Apocrypha? It makes me think of Apocalypse.
Yeah. I don't know. I honestly, I'm really not an expert in all that. I mean, I kind of have a sense of like why they developed differently. They were just used differently in different churches and that kind of stuff. But that being said, like one of the reasons I think has to do with like the difference between like these are Old Testament books that. Like our best manuscripts of them come from Greek sources. Okay, so that may be a part of it that they're not, Hebrew, but that's not universally true.
Were they in
some
the
of them do have Hebrew versions too. The Septuagint, yes, that's right. And
they were, or
yeah,
okay,
yeah. I think that's universally true. I'm pretty sure that's true all the way across of it. And so so our earliest sources of them are these like 4th century versions of the whole canon that have this thing. Anyway,
cool.
Or I'll say 4th century, maybe 3rd century, but somewhere in there, these like versions of the Septuagint, which is the Greek. For those of you that don't know, that's the Greek translation of the Old Testament. So the Old Testament written mostly in Hebrew, a little bit of Aramaic in there as well, but mostly in Hebrew. And about 70 years before Jesus, it was translated into Greek. Okay, and so a lot of times what we have in the New Testament is authors that are translating those Hebrew books, okay, or they're reading it not in Hebrew. They're actually quoting from the Septuagint versions.
Sometimes is it like taking a song lyric and putting it in Google Translate, and then putting it back in Google Translate again to translate the
translation that's an interesting
back
question.
At you?
Yeah, there are some of these things that people have wondered if they were written in Greek originally, and then like some of the Hebrew versions are like translations back. But that's, I mean, I want to speak really broadly there, okay, because each of these books has like its own manuscript tradition, okay, and really and truthfully, that nowhere does that come out as much as in the stuff that we're going to do tonight. All right, so what we're going to do tonight is we're going to talk about some of what are called the Greek additions to Daniel, okay, and there are several of these. So and the way this kind of comes out is there's actually a couple of different Greek translations of the Old Testament, okay. When we get to the book of Daniel, there are like 4 or 5 different versions of Daniel.
Really?
Yeah. There's like a Hebrew version. Okay. There's the Hebrew version that's both Hebrew and Aramaic actually in the book of Daniel. Okay, and then there are a couple of different Greek versions. Okay, and one of those in one of those traditions, though they're all kind of a little different in what they contain. Okay, and in the Septuagint version. There are these additions. We'll just kind of to paint very broad. I just want to say that this stuff is when we get to Daniel, it's a little more complicated than what's on the surface. Okay, and you have the basic outline of the book of Daniel, and then you have like a couple of weird bits that are kind of thrown in here and there. Okay, And what we normally read is like the basic version of it, okay, and it's the version that's been canonical for a long time. But then you have these other pieces that are really, man, they're really fascinating, okay, and they kind of float around, like they show up in different spots in different manuscript traditions, okay. So they're not like fixed in the story in the same way that the stuff is that.
Is that how they knew like maybe this part was added later because it's in different places?
Yeah. Like I say, it's not. I can't really dive into that. It's fascinating stuff. I actually love studying that kind of stuff, but it gets pretty nerdy really quickly. Okay, all right. And if you're really interested in that, okay, if you're really interested,
go
in
to
that
theology
kind of
school.
No, that's not what I'm saying. We can talk about it, but it's just going to be a different kind of, different kind of experience.
This class will last 5 more weeks instead of this being the last one.
Right. By the way, Brent and Celia and Dave and
hey guys,
I guess Isla's in there too, and Deidre. We have several that are watching today, so we're glad that you guys are here. We're glad that you joined us. We're going to jump into some of these stories, okay? Because they're really fascinating, and and the Daniel ones are they're more like the Tobit story that we talked about a few weeks ago. Okay,
that was so much fun
in that same kind of adventure vein a little bit, and they're like these tales about Daniel. And with each of them, there's kind of a question about whether or not Daniel was the original character in it, or like they're adapted as they're like inserted into the book.
Yeah.
And kind of made to be about Daniel. And we mentioned last week at the end too. There's a section of this that's also called the Song of Azariah and the Prayers of the Three Jews, okay, or something like that. And it's the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Like it's like poetry that's attributed to them, kind of in the face of their struggles and trials. It's really interesting. It's kind of like riffing off. It's kind of like a theological devotional riffing off of the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego as we all know it. Okay, but I want to kind of leave that alone. I'll just kind of focus on these other stories of Daniel, and there are really 3 of them that I think are pretty interesting. Okay, the first one is called Susanna. Okay, it's called Susanna, but it's really a Daniel story. All right. And if you look up the book of Susanna, okay, now I should say Susanna is, that name may sound familiar because it's a fairly popular name.
Yeah.
But it was really this story was a very popular subject for like Renaissance art, okay, and before or different ones. But you have these like If you look up painting of Susanna or something like that, you're going to see a lot of images that are kind of based on this story. It was kind of, like they had like motifs that they would paint over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And this was one of those that's very, very popular.
She's very inspiring.
Yes.
She's a muse.
And also because the core of the story revolves around her being beautiful, right? So your artists are like, this is perfect.
I'll call it Susanna.
I'm going to make a church painting, and I get to paint a beautiful woman. You can see how they kind of go that way.
Yeah.
Anyway, and the story is sometimes it's called like a detective story. A couple of these are kind of called detective stories. In fact, one of the ones that we're going to tell in a second is like pretty renowned as like the first story in a whole genre of like detective, like mystery mystery stories. Yeah, like in the history of literature. Yeah. So, and these are like literarily like pretty cool little stories, especially for where they come from in history. Okay. All right. So the story of Susanna goes like this. Okay. They're in Babylon. Okay. Babylonian exile. And it says that there are a couple of the people who are, first of all, we learned that Susanna is, married to a man named Joachim. Okay, Joachim. And what we know about her is that she's like super beautiful. Okay,
and feared the Lord.
Yeah, you're right. And what happens in this story is that her husband is kind of in the upper elite of the Jews that are stationed there in Babylon, and there are 2 kind of crooked scoundrels that are appointed to be judges over Israel. By the way, this story is a little salacious, so just want to go ahead.
PG-13?
Absolutely, yeah. So just
warning.
Yeah, that's really for Jordan Wright. Let you know, just a little heads up here. Okay, all right. We'll be telling the PG-13 or PG-ish version. I don't know. Okay. We're going to tell a mild version of this story. Okay. All right. Anyway, all right. All that to say, what happens is these crooked men that are both of them appointed judges. All right. Mm-hmm. Well, they come to use Joachim's house.
So just tell me. Yeah. They're Israelites.
Yes.
They're crooked, and they're appointed judges, even though they're in exile.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Babylonian way of like them doing some self-rule while they're in exile.
Okay, so they're judges over Jewish people, but not over
absolutely,
territory.
Absolutely, yeah. And don't think of high rulers. Like what's happening here is that people are like bringing them disputes. And this is like civil. It's like Jewish civil.
It's like when you tell your kids, "You guys work it out."
Yeah, very much so. So it's like the Babylonians have basically, and by the way, remember like that's the story of Daniel. Right, Daniel's being appointed as an official. He even becomes over some territory and stuff like this. Like, so this is not.
It's not
not completely unheard of. Yeah, and what happens in the story though is that the site where these guys are holding court is in Joachim's house. Okay, and people are coming and they just
in his garden.
Case after
is
case.
It in his garden?
Well, we're gonna get to the
garden.
There's a garden coming. Okay.
Okay.
What happens though is that these two elders are they fall in love, but they fall into lust with Susanna. Okay, and they lust after her, they covet her body, and so here's how the story goes. Okay, let's just kind of read a little bit of this, and because it's salacious, but it's shameful, but there's a bit of it that's supposed to be like comical about these guys in there.
Okay.
They're buffoons.
Yeah.
Okay, here's how it goes. All right.
Stooges.
Yes. When the people left at noon, Susanna would go into her husband's garden to walk. Every day the two elders used to see her going in and walking about, and they began to lust for her. They suppressed their consciences and turned away their eyes from looking to heaven or remembering their duty to administer justice. Both were overwhelmed with passion for her, but they did not tell each other of their distress, for they were ashamed to disclose their lustful desire to seduce her. And day after day, they watched eagerly to see her. One day they said to each other, "Let us go home, for it is time to lunch." And time for lunch. So they both left and parted from each other. But turning back, they met again. And when each pressed the other for the reason, they confessed their lust. Okay, so, and then it says, then together they arranged for a time when they could find her alone. All right, so what happens is these guys are like, oh, it's kind of lunchtime. What do you think we take a break? And then they leave.
I'll see you after lunch.
I'll see you. We'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah.
We'll see you tomorrow. We're done for now.
Then they both turn back around.
And then they're like, walk, going away. And then, they wait for the other person to go away. And then, they get back on the road and they go. And what happens is they bump into each other on the way back. And when they do, they're like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Mm-hmm. What are you doing?
That's like a Three Stooges thing.
Absolutely.
Sure.
It's very, a lot of buffoonery here, okay?
Yeah.
And then, unbelievably, they confess to each other what they're doing. Well, I'll tell you what I was really going to do. I was really on my way up, seduce that Susanna.
Yeah.
And then, astonishingly, once they tell each other that, me too, they say,
we should try together.
We should try to go together. The same time. Yeah, it's really terrible.
The only thing better than one old lech trying to seduce you is two.
Yeah, this is not good. So what happens is they go and they try to execute this plan, mm-hmm. and they go to the garden, and they hide in the garden. And while they're hiding, by the way, hiding in a garden, what does that remind you of?
The story from Genesis chapter 3.
Yeah, that's right. When Adam and Eve are mm-hmm. shameful, it's their shame, right? That they're
mm-hmm.
hiding. That this is
they're ashamed. Yeah.
The difference is though that they are hiding, and Susanna is not, and she's naked. Okay, because there is the pool. The pool where she's going to bathe is in the garden.
Gotcha.
And there's nobody there, so she has the gate locked. And she tells her servant maidens that are with her. She says, "I'm going to take a bath now. You guys take this other stuff and go." Okay, and so, so when that's in there, when that happens, oh man, they jump out. Okay, and this is what they say. They said, when the maids had gone out, the two elders got up and ran to her, and they said, "Look, the garden doors are shut, and no one can see us. We are burning with desire for you, so give your consent and lie with us. If you refuse, we will testify against you that a young man was with you, and that this was why you sent your maids away."
Not cool.
Which, by the way, is not how consent works.
No.
Right? Like, that's not consent. That's blackmail for sex. Right? And so, yeah, it's interesting that word is in this text, because that's not, like, that's a significant word
if
in
you
the
give your consent.
Me Too era, but, that's not the, that's not definitely not what consent looks like, right?
That's not what they meant.
Yeah. So, at any rate, she's trapped, right? And she says, Susanna groaned and said, "I am completely trapped. For if I do this, it will mean death for me. If I do not, I cannot escape your hands." Right? "I choose not to do it. I will fall into your hands rather than sin in the sight of the Lord." So she says, "I'm trapped. I can't do this." And it would be just like I was dead. I'd be
dead.
Death inside. Dead. I'd be my soul would be dead, if I did this. But if I don't do it, then you got me cornered. And she says, "Well, forget it. I'm not going to do it." She does what.
She calls their bluff.
She calls. She says
it's not a bluff. They really do what they say that they're
right.
Going to
She believes that. She believes that's going to happen. Yeah. But what she does is she just kind of refuses to abandon what she knows of God. And by the way, this we're told earlier in the story we're told her parents were righteous and had trained their daughter according to the law of Moses. Okay, so we know that, like, we've already had a hint in the story that Susanna is a righteous person. Okay, anyway,
it could have meant literal death for her too. I mean,
oh yeah. No, you're right. Yeah. You're right.
Like,
yeah. Because then. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. They'll kill her because it's adultery, and that's actually what happens right now. Is that because of that? Well, I mean, that's not what happens, but
hopefully not. I
what
what
happens is
she
cries out. Okay, and when she cries out, then they start crying out, shouting.
Yeah.
So all the three of them are screaming for help to come. Okay. And somebody comes and opens the doors, or they go and open the door. When the people in the house heard the shouting in the garden, they rushed in at the side door to see what had happened to her. And when the elders told their story, the servants felt very much ashamed, for nothing like this had ever been said about Susanna. So they're all like, "Not Susanna, Susanna,
yeah,
Susanna's in there with some young man committing adultery. That doesn't sound right?" But that's all that happens that day. It says the next day, because the court's over that day, right? So the next day, court's on. The next day, when the people gathered at the house of her husband Joachim, the two elders came, full of their wicked plot to have Susanna put to death. In the presence of the people, they said, "Send for Susanna, daughter of Hilkiah, the wife of Joachim." And so they sent for her, and she came with her parents, her children, and all her relatives. And now Susanna was a woman of great refinement and beautiful in appearance. As she was veiled, the scoundrels ordered her to be unveiled so they might feast their eyes on her beauty. All those who were with her and all who saw her were weeping. Okay, so you can kind of see how
her family and children and everyone was there, and they know
this is a shameful thing that's happened. Yeah. And people have a sense that there's something shameful, but they don't know. It doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem right that this woman that they've revered, But at any rate,
but there's these two upstanding judges that say that this is happening.
Yeah.
That's what they're thinking.
So it says, then the two elders stood up before the people and laid their hands on her head. And though through her tears she looked up toward heaven, for her heart trusted in the Lord. Okay, so this is the point of the whole thing, right? Like, and I want to stop right here and say, can you see how this story up to this point, like it kind of reminds you of the whole Tobit story that we did a few weeks ago, right? There's a Jew in Babylon. He's choosing to do right,
And bad things.
Bad things are happening around him, but he's gonna persevere in that story, and he's gonna be vindicated through the end. Yeah. Right.
Well, we'll see.
Well, but that's the stage. That's the kind of story we're reading.
Yeah. Okay. It's we're in Babylon story.
Yeah, it's a Daniel story.
It's a Daniel story. Yeah. It's we're in exile story. Exile story.
Right. Yeah, that's right. So the elder said, while we were walking in the garden alone, this woman came in with 2 maids, shut the garden doors, and dismissed the maids. And then a young man who was hiding there, which, by the way, even the maids can't dispute this. Mm-hmm. Right? Even Susanna's like close, because they're like, oh, that is what happened. Yeah. We were going.
You think that's it, or it's because they're women?
Huh? Well, no, they just can't. They can't dispute, because like so far the story they're telling is the right thing that happened. That's the only part that there's witnesses to, that they go in together and then she sends the maids away. Then a young man who was hiding there came to her and lay with her. We were in a corner of the garden. When we saw this wickedness, we ran to them. Although we saw them embracing, we could not hold the man because he was stronger than we, and he opened the doors and got away. We did, however, seize this woman and asked who the young man was, but she would not tell us these things. We testify. Mm-hmm. Okay? Because they were elders of the people and the judges, the assembly believed them and condemned her to death. All right, so that's where the story is at this point. And it says, then Susanna cried out with a loud... But wait, before we go into this. That part of the story reminds me of the story of Jesus and the woman that's brought to him who's caught in the act of adultery, right? Mm-hmm. Remember, and they say they come in with just the woman, the man's not there, then they try to trap Jesus into condemning her to death. Yeah. But it kind of had shades of the story, right?
Sure, yeah, I never thought about that before.
And so there's a way in which, like, again, we've talked about how these stories are kind of a backdrop to some of the Gospels in some ways. I think in that story, like for a first century Jew to read that story in John, you would definitely know this story, right? And it would be like, well, that's not the heroes doing that, right? That's the villains that are trying to set up
the ones that are yeah. Oh, cool.
Even though in that story, she has done it, right? And that's not the whole ploy in that. But I'm just saying, they're using the same device. They're trying to use that vehicle of this woman's going for their own purposes. Okay. So in this story, it says, Susanna cried out with a loud voice and said, "O eternal God, you know what is secret and are aware of all things before they came to be. You know that these men have given false evidence against me, and now I am to die, though I have done none of the wicked things that they have charged against me." The Lord heard her cry. Just as she was being led off to execution, God stirred up the Holy Spirit of a young lad named Daniel. Now we're talking. Mm-hmm. Now enter the hero, right? Yeah. And he shouted with a loud voice, "I want no part in shedding this woman's blood." And all the people turned around to him and said, "What is this that you're saying?" So I mean, Daniel's just a person in the crowd in the story, right? Yeah. So he's just a person in the story. He's sitting back there. All this stuff's happened. This woman's been condemned to death. She cries out. She prays. And he stands up and says, "I don't want to have any part in killing this woman." Right? And they're all like,
"How does he know?
What are you talking about?" Right. So taking a stand among them, he said, "Are you such fools, O Israelites, as to condemn a daughter of Israel without examination and without learning the facts? Return to court, for these men have given false evidence against her." And so all the people hurried back. And the rest of the elders said to him, "Come, sit among us and inform us, for God has given you the standing of an elder." And Daniel said to them, "Separate them far from each other, and I'll examine them." Now this is like in court.
Yeah.
The court practice.
Procedural.
It is. Drama. Right. Yeah. And he's got one of them in an examination room. It is. Like legit. Like this is for real. That's what this is.
Yeah. And maybe that's the genre that was created.
It's you'll see something a little bit different in the but this is it's a detective story. It really is a detective story. Yeah. Okay. So when they were separated from each other, he summoned one of them and said to him, "You old relic of wicked days."
What a great
really starting off like Your sins have now come home, which you have committed in the past, pronouncing unjust judgments, condemning the innocent and acquitting the guilty, though the Lord said, you shall not put an innocent and righteous person to death. Now, by the way, let's just start off here, and you can see that there's like a broader critique of these judges happening, right? Like he's like, it's not just that these guys happen to be bad apples. Like he's like, it's like a critique of the injustice that kind of landed Israel in exile in start with. Right, exactly. All right, so now, so this is what he says. Now, then, if you really saw this woman, tell me this. Under which tree did you see them being intimate with each other? And he answered, under a mastic tree. And Daniel said, very well. This lie has cost you your head, for the angel of God has received the sentence from God and will immediately cut you in two. Mastic and cut, like the Hebrew words for these two, for the type of tree and cut, are like, it's like a wordplay, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
You say it's a mastic tree, or you're going to get masticed.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I really don't know what kind of tree that is, but but that's what he says, right? Okay. And you can kind of see what's going to happen here at this point, right? So he
this
says,
is like Daniel's dreams, though, right? Like he said the same thing to the baker, and
he like takes what he said, and
they have visions, and that he's like something eating his head, and his head's gonna.
This will happen to you.
It's very similar to Daniel's dreams.
Joseph. It's Joseph.
That was Joseph. That was Joseph.
Yeah.
Daniel did different dreams. Never mind.
But he's playing the role. He's playing this intermediary role. Yeah. So. And this kind of turning of you say something and then I turn it back in your face, is definitely
it's called a burn.
Yeah, it's sick burn, Danny. Then putting him to one side, so he made him go over a little bit. He ordered them to bring the other, and he said to him, "You offspring of Canaan and not of Judah, beauty has beguiled you, and lust has perverted your heart. This is how you have been treating the daughters of Israel, and they were intimate with you through fear." But a daughter of Judah would not tolerate your wickedness. All right, so there's some critique of the northern
He's kind of throwing shade on Israel there.
Yeah. Now then, tell me, under what tree did you catch them being intimate with each other? And he answered, under an evergreen oak.
Wrong answer.
Yep. So now we can see what's in. So Daniel said to him, very well, this lie has also cost you your head, for the angel of God is waiting with his sword to split you into. Again, split is evergreen oak. The word that's the type of tree is like the punishment sort of thing. So it's to destroy you both. And then, let's see here. Yeah. So, by the way, that's also, it's not just the other pun that's going on here is you're going to be split. Well, the whole thing that Daniel did, like the wisdom in his approach here was to split the two of them. But now he's saying, now you're going to get, each of you is going to get split again, right? So the splitting is kind of like the device.
This reminds me kind of like Solomon too.
Yes.
Solomon thing.
Yes. That's exactly the point. It's a wisdom story.
Yeah.
It's a wisdom story. So then the whole assembly raised a great shout and blessed God, who saves those who hope in him. So it's very clear who the crowd really wanted to win, but they felt compelled earlier. They're like, "Oh, sorry, Susanna, we've got to kill you," But now they're like, "Yes, we don't have to kill her. We get to kill these guys, right?"
Jerks.
And it says, and they took action against the two elders because out of their own mouths Daniel had convicted them of bearing false witness. They did to them as they had wickedly planned to do to their neighbor, acting in accordance with the law of Moses. They put them to death, and then innocent blood was spared that day. And Hilkiah and his wife praised God for their daughter Susanna, as so did her husband Joachim and all her relatives, because she was found innocent of a shameful deed. And from that day on, Daniel had a great reputation among the people.
That was cool.
It's a good story, isn't it? Yeah, and so you're identifying him so correctly. He's the Perry Mason character. In the story, right? Like he's the one that's kind of figuring out. Wait a minute, there's a hole in that testimony. Yeah, and he's playing the witnesses off of each other to kind of reveal. A couple of things. Like first of all, his cleverness in doing that is a sign of his wisdom from God, right? And that's Daniel in all of the Daniel stories is meant to be someone whose wisdom and desire to be faithful, represents the way Israel's supposed to live before the world. Okay.
Yeah.
In this story, those two things are kind of split in part, right? Like his cleverness is what makes Daniel a hero in the story, but the other hero is Susanna because she's the one that actually is the one putting her life on the line for faithfulness to God. Okay, so like in several of the stories in Daniel, like those things are really, like he really personifies both those things, but they're kind of split in this story. Yeah. It also just shows like whenever you listen to a story, you learn both from the heroes and the villains. Right? And here from the heroes, you learn that kind of wisdom. You kind of learn to revere that kind of cleverness. Like, he's smart about it, right? But you also learn the faithfulness of Susanna, like being willing to put risk, to be faithful even when there's great risk. But you also learn some things from these, like, crooks, too, right? Like it's a warning against how you're, like, desires or lustful desires can like kind of lead you and stuff. It's also like they hit several. they covet. There's
a lot of things.
They bear false witness.
A lot of
okay. Exactly. They lust. Like and they're unjust. Like there's like
probably
several layers.
Disobeying their parents as well.
It's probably all happened on a Sabbath, right?
Yeah.
Like right. You can see it, but I mean they're like prototypically violating the Torah.
Yeah.
And so you have somebody who's representing faithfulness, somebody else. These are very flat characters. It's not like they were really thinking about it, and they really want to do the right thing, and they're wrestling with their desires. They're just going for it, right? Because this is a very high contrast story. Like it's black and white. Somebody's really Susanna's absolutely doing the right thing, and they're absolutely doing the wrong thing, right? Yeah. And so the story offers that to people, saying, well, "Where are you gonna be?" Okay, but there is another character, right? So you have Daniel, you got Susanna, you've got the crooks, but then you got all the people watching, right? And they have to, like, it's the challenge is for their wisdom too, right? All of Judah is supposed to be making this. This is actually a very democratic way of coming to this judgment, right? Like the elders are kind of like making this accusation and they're hearing the witnesses, but then there's the whole people that raise their voice to convict them, right? And in this story, and not that was typical or anything like that, but what this story does though is it puts the burden on the bystanders.
Yeah,
and
including
it says,
like her husband, right?
Yeah, it says, can you guys, right? And they knew. Even though they were hearing the testimony earlier, they knew that wasn't right.
Yeah. Right?
Like everything in their hearts is telling them that's not right. But they couldn't figure out how to get it around the testimony, right? Yeah. And so they needed Daniel's heroic to all the people in this story because he's giving them a way of responding, to the thing that they know in their heart to be true. Right? Yeah. It's a good story.
Yeah, it's very much like, he's the one guy that's going to stand up against everybody else, and you call out something wrong that's going on. And but if he didn't have the wisdom to figure out that she hadn't done it, then what's it telling the rest of the crowd? Like, if you don't have the wisdom, maybe you shouldn't stand up and say anything, or what? I
don't know. I don't know.
That's tough because
there may be pieces of the story that you don't know, right? Like that's one of the cautions of a tale like this. But
it also reminds me of Esther, right? Yes. That's another exile story that's very much like this, and it's very similar in a lot of respects.
Yeah, people have to kind of discover these other clues about what was really happening. So they really know.
Yeah, and you've got good characters and then just really bad characters. Right. You've got a few in between characters. There's a lot more characters in Esther, right?
No, that's a good point though. So, at any rate, this story though. I think the story of Susanna. You can see why it was like a high story for like artists to paint, right? Like, I mean, it's just got this. You got this wonderfully virtuous woman who's going to stand up for her faith and really represents. And it's apparently so beautiful as to drive people out of their minds, right?
Yeah.
So any rate, you can enjoy looking up some Susanna art later today.
Is the Susanna art PG-13 also?
It probably depends on who you're looking at. Okay. Yeah. You mean Renaissance guy? The Renaissance folks.
I know. That's what I was kind of thinking. Yeah. You never know.
You never know.
Okay.
Right. But a lot of it was painted to be put in churches. So yes, probably, a good bit of it is.
Probably okay.
A good bit of it is. Right. Yeah. These are not pagan paintings of Venus or whatever. Okay, all right. So the next two stories, and we only have we may be able to talk about those because they're pretty simple. Okay?
25 minutes.
All right. So this next story is called the story of Bel. And
Balthazar.
No. Yes. Okay, that's Daniel.
Yes.
Okay. But Bel, I misspoke when I said this last week. Bel is actually, and the reason Daniel is named that is because Bel is the name of the Babylonian god.
Oh, yeah.
Right,
yeah.
like that's part of the naming. They're all named for.
They were all named after
that's
Yahweh, right? All of the Shadrach, Meshach, like Daniel, is God, right?
Right,
and
right.
So, and then he changed them to like pagan.
He's given
God
this
names,
name,
right?
Belshazzar.
Yeah.
And
kind
yes,
of.
exactly,
Okay.
yes. And so Bel is the god that he's named after. Okay, it is a name for the god Marduk. Okay, which was this like the high deity in Babylon. Okay. And Bel is just a big idol, big pagan idol, right? There's a big statue in the temple, and people go and they put food in front of the statue to feed the god and all this kind of stuff, right?
Is this the one that fell over when the Ark of the Covenant was in?
No, that's Dagon. That's a Philistine god.
Philistine.
Yeah, that's a Canaanite deal. But this is a Babylonian deal, and this is, but it is a story. That's a very good point that you bring that story up, because that's a story that's written to subvert the Canaanite god, the Philistine gods, right, as a way of showing that Yahweh was superior to them. That's absolutely what's going to happen in this story.
Oh, awesome.
Okay. All right. So Daniel has already become high up with the king. Okay. I don't know if we're. Here we go. King Astyages. I don't know. No. I said this was Cyrus. Okay, so it's Cyrus is the king that said.
Okay, so Cyrus is the one that kicks the Babylonians out, right?
Yeah, it's the Persian king, but this is a Babylonian god too. Okay, so here we go. Now the Babylonians had an idol called Bel. I guess this envisions like the king ruling over the Babylonians still there. I guess that's kind of it's kind of weird.
So he's letting them. Yeah. Well, they did that, right?
Yeah.
The Persians just let you kind of keep your gods and whatever, and let you go back home and build your temple and stuff like that sometimes.
Yeah, but the Babylonians, they're kind of portrayed kind of weirdly here, I think. At any rate,
okay.
But the contest here is that. It says every day they provided for it 12 bushels of choice flour and 40 sheep and 6 measures of wine. So they bring a pretty good.
Keep that up every day.
They bring a feast. Well, it comes from like the whole city, right? I mean, so this is what they're collecting every day. Is this their things for this and.
That's a lot of sheep.
And it says Daniel didn't do it, right? So, but the king does. Yeah. It says Cyrus does. Cyrus goes and worships and goes down to worship the idol every day. This is Daniel, but Daniel worshipped his own God. So the king said to him, "Why do you not worship Bel?" And he answered, "Because I do not revere idols made with hands, but the living God who created heaven and earth and has dominion over all living creatures." And the king said to him, "Do you not think that Bel is a living God? Do you not see how much he eats and drinks every day?" And Daniel laughed.
Yep.
Yeah. And said, "Do not be deceived, O king, for this thing is only clay inside and bronze outside, and it never ate or drank anything." Right?
I like it.
The king was angry and called to the priest of Bel and said to them, "If you do not tell me who is eating these provisions, you shall die." They're like, "You guys, wait. you better shoot straight with me. I've been coming and I've been giving you all my sheep, bringing all this wine down here every day. And you better tell me that God really is eating that, right?" And they're like, "Oh." No. He says, "But if you prove that Bel is eating them," he says, "if you don't tell me who's eating these things, you're going to die. But if you prove that Bel is eating them, then Daniel shall die, because he has spoken blasphemy against Bel." And Daniel said to the king, "Let it be done as you said." Now there were 70 priests of Bel besides their wives and children. And so the king went with Daniel to the temple of Bel. And the priests of Bel said, "See, we are now going outside. You yourself, O king, set out the food." He said, "You set out the food and prepare the wine and shut the door and seal it with your signet. And when you return in the morning, if you do not find that Bel has eaten it all, we will die. Otherwise, Daniel will, who is telling lies about us." They were unconcerned, for beneath the table they had made a hidden entrance, through which they used to go in regularly and consume the provisions. After they had gone out, the king set the food for Bel. And then Daniel ordered his servants to bring ashes, and they scattered them throughout the whole temple in the presence of the king alone. And then they went out and shut the door and sealed it with the king's signet and departed. So you can kind of see how this is setting up, right? Like Daniel is laying his trap for them. But they think they've got him, right? They've got this rigged up thing, and they're going to... they've got a hidden door, they're going to go in the middle of the night and take this stuff. They've kind of like let the king go in there and set it up like he wants, and goes in and he locks it. And they're expecting that, the king's going to open that in the next morning. And
now this says there were 70 priests with their wives and children. So there's like 70 families were eating these 40 sheep and all this wine and stuff. Every night they're just having a big party.
The decadence of that, the gluttony of that is part of the humor of the story.
Yeah. And you know what? Was there 70 priests in the Jeremiah story? When he killed all the priests?
You got me on that one.
There may have been. I don't know if you're supposed
Jeremiah
to think
story, or you're talking
Jeremiah?
about Elijah?
Elijah.
Okay.
Elijah. My bad.
Man, you threw me a curve on that.
Anyway.
You're talking about at the temple, the prophets of Baal.
Yeah, the prophets of Baal,
Yeah, maybe 70. That sounds about right to me.
Anyway. It sounds like something similar might happen here.
I thought it was like 400 now that I say that.
Maybe it is. Maybe it was much more.
At any rate, you can see what's going on here, right? Okay. It says, early in the morning, first of all, during the night, the priests came as usual with their wives and children. They ate and drank everything. Early in the morning, the king rose and came, and Daniel with him. And the king said, "Are the seals unbroken, Daniel?" And he answered, "They are unbroken, O king." And as soon as the doors were open, the king looked at the table and shouted in a loud voice, "You are great, O Bel, and in you there is no deceit at all."
You left a part out.
Huh?
You left this part out.
No, I said that. I said that earlier.
That Daniel, they put ashes everywhere. Oh, were you leaving that?
No, I said it. I said it.
Okay,
yeah, but but it just slipped through. Okay. Yeah. So Daniel's okay. So what happened, right?
Yeah.
But Daniel laughed and restrained the king from going in. He's like, "Don't go. No, don't go in."
Yeah.
He says, "Look at the floor," he said, "and notice whose footprints these are." And the king said, "I see the footprints of men and women and children." So what happens is, like, Daniel, like, after the king sets everything up, Daniel's like, "All right, now watch this." And the king knows it. Nobody else knows it. He has them sprinkle ashes all around the floor of this temple. Okay. And so when they open the door, the first thing that the king sees is that the food's gone. He's like, "See, Daniel, I told you. Bel is eating. This God is eating all this food." And Daniel says, whoa, not so fast. Before you go in, look at the ground. And they notice that there's like footprints all over from where these priests have like snuck in through the door, and snuck in through the hidden door and all that sort of stuff. And so it says the king put them to death. And it says the king was enraged. He arrested the priests and their wives and the children. He showed them the secret doors. They showed him the secret doors to which they used to enter, consume what was at the table. And so the king put them to death and gave Bel over to Daniel, who destroyed it and its temple. So, like the story that we had before, right? Like many of the stories of Daniel, this is a story about Daniel resisting idolatry, right? And he does so in dramatic fashion, shows that his God is superior. Okay.
Yeah. Which is right in line with the rest of Daniel. Yeah. Of the stuff. It
shows that this idol was like a dead god. These priests are just kind of messing around with it.
They just want free food.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah. So here's what happens after that. All right. So this is the third and our final story.
Okay. So that was the Bel part of the story, and this is the dragon. It's not Bel and the dragon. Like Bel like plays with the dragon.
Two stories.
And their friends.
Yeah.
It's two different stories. One's about Bel. One's about the dragon.
Yeah, so that was the story about Bel. Now it's time for the story about the dragon. Now, this is about a dragon.
Like a real dragon.
Let's start off right there.
Like, okay. Okay. Dragon is like a medieval word, right? What is the real word?
I can tell you. I don't know what this.
Crocodile.
I don't know what. No, actually, I bet the Greek word is like Draco or something like that.
Really?
I would think so. Yeah.
Because I know, like, sometimes we'll read passages in the Old Testament. They'll talk about Leviathan and like dragons, but you don't really know how to translate it, so you just call it a dragon.
The question is, what is this? What does it mean? You know, is it? And it is some like giant snaky creature.
Crocodile,
you know, yeah, it could be something like that. You know, we don't really know. But it could be like a crocodile. It could be like a Komodo dragon kind of creature, or something. It's something like it's some creature like this. Even though we're supposed to imagine it as being, big, large, fearsome thing. Okay, but we don't really get a lot of description about it. It's just kind of.
It's a dragon.
It's a dragon. Yeah. And
does it breathe fire?
It is not that I know of breathe any fire in this story. Okay. But it's the king says to Daniel. Now it says that the Babylonians revere this dragon. Okay. The king said to Daniel, "You cannot deny that this is a living God, so worship him." So Daniel,
this thing can eat
like for real. Yeah, he's like, "Look, Daniel, I know that statue was a statue; it wasn't real, but that's real. That's a dragon. That's a real thing. Creature." Yeah. However, we're supposed to imagine what the creature is. He's like, "Look, Daniel, that's a real thing, and I want you to worship it." And Daniel said, "I worship the Lord my God, for he is a living God. But give me permission, O king, and I'll kill the dragon without a sword or a club." He's like, "I won't even take a weapon." All right. And the king said, "I give you permission." And so it says Daniel took pitch, tar, fat, and hair, and boiled them together and made cakes.
That's a disgusting cake.
It sounds like the grossest cake ever. Yes.
Tar, fat, and hair. So he ate it because it had fat in it, I guess.
Yeah, he's using it to flavor it and make it a creature or something like that, And it says that the dragon ate, and he made the cakes and he fed them to the dragon, and the dragon ate them, and I guess something happens, gets constipated because he ate a bunch of tar or something like that, and so he burst open. It says the dragon burst open. Yeah, and Daniel says to the king, "See what you've been worshiping?" He gives it a food bomb. Yeah. Some reason that he has this thing killed. So anyway, the dragon's destroyed, and the Babylonians are really upset about it. They're upset. It says they're indignant, and they conspired against the king, saying the king has become a Jew. This king is pounding around with Daniel. They go around, they're killing all our gods. They killed the idol. They killed Baal.
Yeah.
And he's this is Cyrus the Persian, right? It's the Babylonians that are against him. Man, come on, man, what's going on? He's going around. He's going around. He's just feeding them tar. Come on, stop doing this. So he destroyed Baal and killed the dragon and slaughtered the priest. And going to the king, they said, "Hand Daniel over to us, or else we'll kill you and your household."
What? They just
straight up threatened Cyrus. Okay. This is absurd. Really absurd. The king saw that they were pressing him hard, and under compulsion, he handed Daniel over to them.
So maybe he just got overpowered there. He got a little overconfident, and then got overpowered.
Yeah. Well, it's supposed to be absurd. It's supposed to be absurd. The idea that some this random group of Babylonians were going to rise up against King Cyrus and
it's not real
for the sake of that's not it's not something that would remotely was going to happen.
They needed a plot device so that Daniel would be in the hands of the bad guys.
Yeah. They press him though. I mean, that they are threatening the king. Well, it is supposed to be. It's not just a plot device. It's also supposed to be subversive to the king, right? All this stuff is subversive. Daniel is the wise one that's going around figuring stuff. And the king is the one. The
king is kind of made out.
He doesn't really have power. Yeah, he's kind of going around.
Like a dimwit.
You don't know that. Well, yeah, he's kind of a buffoon. Yeah.
Okay.
So in this one though, so what do? They throw Daniel into the lion's den. Okay.
Again?
Yep. Yeah, that's why this is kind of a repeat on that story in a way. It kind of comes to it differently. Earlier we had this, this is not the way. Daniel just refuses to worship in the story of in canonical Daniel. But here he actually kills the god, the thing that they're worshiping. It says they threw Daniel in the lion's den. He was there for 6 days. There were 7 lions in the den, and every day they had been given 2 human bodies and 2 sheep, but now they were given nothing so that they would devour Daniel. So they don't just throw him in there. It's
the same thing, right? They hadn't eaten for days or whatever.
They throw him in and then they don't feed him.
Yeah.
And it says, now this is where we get a really weird conclusion, epilogue to this story. It says, now the prophet Habakkuk was in Judea. He had made a stew and had broken bread into a bowl and was going to the field to take it to the reapers. But the angel of the Lord said to Habakkuk, take the food that you have to Babylon to Daniel in the lion's den. And Habakkuk said, Sir, I've never seen Babylon, and I know nothing about the den. And the angel of the Lord took him by the crown of his head and carried him by the hair. And with the speed of the wind, he set him down in Babylon right over the den.
Wow.
And, yeah. And then Habakkuk shouted, Daniel, Daniel, take the food that God has sent you. And Daniel
course he
said,
did.
Yeah.
I'm getting out of here.
Yeah, right. Daniel said, you have remembered me, O God, have not forsaken those who love you. So Daniel got up and ate. And the angel of the Lord immediately returned Habakkuk to his place.
Didn't the angel just take the soup himself?
This is the very first story that we know of about fast food.
You thought there weren't going to be any dad jokes. They were
Get
raw.
it? Fast food? The speed of the wind?
It's so bad.
It's an interesting part of the story, though, right? Like, instead of just bringing him some food from somewhere, he like goes and finds a prophet in Judah.
That's made a delicious stew.
Yeah. And by the way, this is not the only story of whisking that we've seen in some of these apocryphal stories. Remember the story of Tobit? Remember there's that bit about how the demon that's being fought is it Sarah? That's her name. That's her name, right? The good girl in Tobit, right? And remember, she was the demon that kept killing all her husbands, and they burned the piece of the fish on the Remember all this? And it says they fought him all the way to like Africa, and then
that's right. Yeah, they brought.
So there's this kind of like rushing back and forth that the angels are doing. So anyway, there's that motif there.
I mean, that's not anything that you hear about, like speed of light travel in the Bible, like anywhere else, right? It's just really in the Apocrypha. It's weird.
Well, yeah, there is in the book of Daniel. You do have a story where an angel tells Daniel, "I've come to." I was coming to greet you, but the Prince of Persia, delayed me. So there is this.
You get
that. It kind of fits in with that a little bit, but it's pretty unusual stuff.
Yeah, that's weird. Okay.
Yeah. On the seventh day, the king came to mourn for Daniel. When he came to the den, he looked in, and there sat Daniel. The king shouted with a loud voice, "You are great, O Lord, the God of Daniel, and there is none beside you." And then he pulled Daniel out and threw into the den those who had attempted his destruction, and they were instantly eaten before his eyes.
I got a question.
Yeah, me too.
Daniel's problem. So the angel brings Habakkuk, who brings soup for Daniel to eat.
Yeah.
That was not Daniel's problem that he was about to starve to death. He was about to get eaten by lions.
You would think, yeah.
Why does he need stew?
Well,
that would make him more tasty.
Do you notice the food motif in all these things?
Stew now.
Like all these stories have like this food motif, right? So you have the story of Bel, the idol, and it's the god that doesn't eat and the priest that do, right? And then you have the story of the dragon, and Daniel kills him with this foul food, food. Yeah, and then you have this story where...
And they're like, well, we got to put stew in this story. Yeah. We got to put some food in this story. We can't end it.
It's really strange. I'm not sure what all the symbolism there with Habakkuk coming and all that kind of stuff. There's something very specific going on there. Yeah. Habakkuk actually lived before... He lives about 100 years before Daniel. So it's kind of it's a strange timing piece in there too, it's just a weird... It's just a weird bit.
So
Okay. Again, that's something that you will occasionally see in like depicted in art. You can find like Renaissance art that has Habakkuk being flown by his hair, with an angel.
So if Habakkuk was 100 years before Daniel, it was still during the Babylonian exile.
Yeah, it's in that same. Okay. He's like a early. He's one of the prophets that's warning about. He's one of the prophets that's warning about Babylon coming.
Okay. And then it was 70 years in exile.
Yeah.
And then so that's about. How long?
Okay. Yeah. It's somewhere in there. I'm not sure exactly the dates of Habakkuk, but if I remember, Habakkuk is like late Assyrian, early.
This is hilarious. Yeah,
But it's an interesting story, isn't it? And again, so the same motif is true. Like the common themes that you see throughout the book of Daniel are being played out. And what I'd really like to kind of point to in these stories is that they're kind of creative riffs on the Daniel stories, right? Like you kind of like take that Daniel story and you kind of rewrite it with heavy doses of creativity. And you get these kinds of things, right? And to me, they're again they kind of underline some of what this what the post-exilic mentality for Judah was, which was make sure you stay clear of the idols of these Gentiles, right? And you find a way, even though you're threatened, you find a way to remain faithful and don't fall into this pagan stuff, right? And with Bel and the Dragon stories, like it's about the same kind of idolatry stuff that we saw before. With the Susanna story, it's about don't fall into like these kind of pagan ways of life, including like false testimony and manipulation and corruption and injustice, or the lustful part of it, the sexual part of it. Like it's all kind of wrapped in there together, and like what these stories are really trying to do is they're trying to give people a sense of like what it means to really be a good Jew. What does it mean to be a faithful part of God's community? And I think we need good stories like that. I think we need good stories that in a compelling way remind us about what it really means to be God's people. I wish we would use narrative, kind of creative narrative. I've done something like that, I guess, a couple times in sermons, and it kind of feels weird, right? Because it's not our normal.
No, I like it.
But I do think that like using narrative to think imaginatively about what draws a picture of what it means to be a good person.
Yeah. Well, also these are like a lot of fun to read, right? I mean,
they're really compelling. I think these are really compelling
some
stories.
families sitting around laughing about this back in the day, and they're laughing about their own exile, kind of. And
they're super portable too.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to just sit and read these out of the text. Like you can. Like you probably just even after one hearing of these things, you could probably sit and get a group of kids together and tell them the story of Bel and the Dragon.
This is like BC VBS.
Yeah. They're very.
Well, maybe not though.
You think of how important that was for the Babylonian period too, right? Or in the post-exilic period, like to have these like portable kind of stories. Yeah. These are family stories. Like these are the kind of things you're sitting around the fire at night, grandma's cooking up something and grandpa like pulls all the kids together and he's like, let me tell these stories about and probably in like embellished ways, right? Yeah. Like that you get more riffs on how beautiful Susanna was, or how how wise Daniel was, or the detail. You can imagine somebody telling the details of this dragon bursting over and his guts going everywhere. And, like the story invites.
Yeah,
that kind
absolutely.
Of like embellishment.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
And so they have that kind of cult. They're tall tales, right? They're kind of that kind. They invite that kind of spinning of a yarn that wouldn't necessarily be. And actually, I kind of think that's part of the nature of why we have them in kind of different places, and like they're kind of more textually suspect or whatnot. It's probably there are probably as many versions of Bel and the Dragon as there were families in Jerusalem.
Yeah. I mean, that reminds me, they're watching
upstairs.
TV in there, but we do this now.
Yeah.
With all the pop culture information that we consume, right?
Yeah.
Like it's all telling us something.
Yes.
It's all telling us. But is it like, does it fit in with our Christian worldview?
That's right.
Maybe not. Right. But most of the like books that we read or the the TV shows where we watch are giving us some kind of like.
They're trying to give you a vision about either what it means to be good, or what it means to be bad.
Yeah.
Or maybe both those things.
And that may not be based on biblical stuff, but it's what the author thinks.
It's a version of it.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And sometimes that may dovetail with what our stories are, and then sometimes it eradicated parts. Yeah. All right. Well, guys, thanks for sticking with us. We're going to jump. Next week we're going to be off.
Amy really thought it was interesting.
I'm glad you liked it, Amy.
High praise from Amy. Thanks, Amy.
I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah.
So we're going to take next week off. Okay.
Yeah, Thanksgiving.
We just decided today that we're going to stay here. I don't know if we told you that yet.
Oh, yeah. Sheree just told me.
Yeah,
sorry, guys.
We were supposed to go to California and be with some family, but because of the virus, we're gonna stay local here, which is a real bummer for us. But at any rate, it's probably the best thing to do. Everybody stay safe with the numbers the way they are. I want you to stay safe and stay be vigilant about things with the virus. We will be back at the first week of December, and we're gonna do a textual series. I've been kind of playing with some ideas for that. We'll talk about that.
Okay, cool.
But we'll have some word about what that's going to be coming up soon. Okay. All right. Thank you guys a lot, and we'll check you later.
So it got canceled. Sorry.
Oh yeah, it's not happening. It died. It's off. We were supposed to leave Saturday. No,
maybe at a later time.
March.
Yeah.
Thanksgiving in March. It's gonna be great. Peace, guys.
Bye.